Hello everyone, my name's Tom, and in this video I'll be showing you how I built this Ferrari F310B from Tamiya in 120 scale. This kit is over 20 years old and I managed to get it from eBay for a really good price. However, the kit does show its age, which I'll go into shortly. Unfortunately, any detail up kits from Studio 27 are hard to come by for this model or extremely expensive. So to maximise this model's potential, I'll be using zero paint and 2K diamond clear, some carbon fibre decals, some Marlboro decals to give it a more authentic look, and some 120 scale ribbon seat belts. I began with the monocoque, which like most of the plastic needed cleaning up. A few seam lines here were easily tidied up using a sanding sponge and a polishing stick. Because of the kit's age or bad production, some of the plastic didn't sit correctly, so using the floor I could glue the monocoque together and hold it in place while it dried. There were areas that needed filling, and for this I used Vallejo putty, which is simple to apply. "99% of the plastic has ejector pin marks, and on the floor you can clearly see how bad they actually are. Even parts like suspension rods and the exhaust have pin marks in areas where they would be visible to the eye. Those that would be seen when the model was complete were sanded away rather than filled in, as the holes were extremely shallow. There is plenty of opportunities to increase detail on this model, and one good example is to drill small holes into the brake discs at even spacings. Once the painting was complete, these really stood out and in my opinion gave value to the build. I also took this opportunity to sand down the aero parts underneath the floor, as realistically they were out of scale, but in all honesty it doesn't make too much of a difference. While preparing the kit, especially a model as intricate as a Formula 1 car, it's so much easier to assemble as many sub-assemblies as possible. Anything unpainted was glued together using Tamiya extra thin cement. The engine is a good example of this. It was during this phase of the construction that I decided that the entire car would need a thorough dry fit, as some parts were struggling to fit, and as I previously mentioned, a lot of the detail contained ejector pin marks. Another easy area to detail up was by adding brake wires. Small holes were drilled into the rear wishbones and gearbox in preparation for adding some small 0.4mm wire after painting. The top cover is well known on this kit not to fit, and it was something that I was anticipating before I even bought it. I did try to alleviate the problem by sanding it down. This did work to an extent and it sat slightly better but not perfect. The tyres supplied in the kit come with a horrible seam line down the middle. Sanding the wheels not only gets rid of the line, but it gives the tyres a more authentic look. Trying to attach the wheels to the drill really required me to use my smooth brain and made me realise that I haven't had to think outside of the box in regard to practical problem solving in a long time. Eventually I created a vise using two plastic discs cut up from an ice cream lid to hold the wheels firmly while holding it against the sandpaper. Before finishing all the preparation of the model, I took the opportunity to prepare the carbon fibre decals that I will be using for the underneath of the floor. In modern Formula 1, the paint is stripped back as much as possible to save weight, but back in the 90s they were not scared to cover the carbon fibre up, hence it would only be visible on the underneath. I took some Tamiya tape, laid it over the parts that I wanted decaling in carbon fibre, then using a pen I carefully traced the part. Initially I had doubts about how accurate a homemade stencil would be, but it gave a surprisingly good result. This piece of tape was then laid on top of the carbon fibre sheet and carefully cut out, ready for after painting. I also took this opportunity to sand down part of the seat where the ribbon for the seatbelts would extend over. This would allow the seat to sit in place even with the seatbelts. I was running low on grey primer, which I was reserving for the bodywork, so the remaining parts were primed in Surfacer 1500 black. Yes, I know what you're thinking, how can I see black primer on a black plastic? It was difficult, but I ensured full coverage before painting. A gloss primer would have made the metallic paints pop here, but the Vallejo semi-gloss primer I had was absolutely horrific to the point that I threw it away. As I've just mentioned, I was saving the grain primer for bodywork. I'm not an art expert, but I understand that paints will appear differently depending on the base that they are painted. So with a red bodywork, I wanted a light primer, hence why I used Surfacer 1500 grey. This was mixed roughly 50-50 with Mr. Hobby leveling thinner, aka Unicorn Tears. To make sure I achieved full coverage, I gave it multiple coats, ensuring that I went 90 degrees to the previous passover. The coats were applied nice and light without any issues. The same was done for the main body, which was held in place by Tamiya tape underneath. From my experience of painting the Honda RA272, I wanted the main body parts painted together, as on the Honda, after 2 coats, there appeared to be 2 tones to the paint job on 2 different parts, which I couldn't work out why. I left the primer to cure for a few days, and to ensure the best finish I noticed some rough patches on the bodywork. This is more than likely due to the paint drying in the air before it hits the model, which can be alleviated by lowering the pressure or holding the brush closer. To tidy the job up, I gave the body a sand with 4000 grit paper, then followed it up with another wet coat. A top tip I learnt during the build was to spray down my air booth with water to prevent dust being captured in the paintwork. I laid down some paper towels and gave the booth a generous spray. This ensures that the water captures any dust in the air. The majority of the parts were painted in Tamiya X18 semi-gloss black as a base coat. Again, to ensure full coverage, the paint was sprayed at 90 degrees to the previous coat. Mr. Hobby Superfine Silver 2 was used, and I've got to say it's a step up from Tamiya's Silver. Again, this paint was thinned 50-50 with Mr. Hobby leveling thinner. Realising how nice the Superfine Silver 2 was, I decided that I would use it on the brake discs and exhaust. The entire brake disc pad component was given a coat of it before being masked up by Humbrol Maskell, which is a great alternative if you don't have a circle cutter. I then sprayed Mr. Metal Colour iron to the inner ring and brake pad. Engine parts were next painted, and rather than go with Tamiya's recommendation of block spraying silver, a quick study of some reference images showed that dry brushing silver onto the raised detail parts would be more realistic. It was just a case of unloading the brush onto a paper towel before brushing over the engine block to allow the detail to stand out. The exhausts were initially painted Mr. Metal Colour iron as the base coat before being highlighted with Superfine Silver 2. This gave a great effect and could be further enhanced by spraying some clear blue and red to replicate heat staining. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I will be using zero paints to enhance the model. If I understand correctly, zero paints are a hot paint, so I ensured that the primer was fully cured before applying, and when I did use the paint, I built it up in several light coats. There's a lot of intricate detail on Formula 1 cars, so after a few coats, a good study of the bodywork to make sure you've covered everywhere is highly recommended. Something else to note is that zero paints dry matte and slightly textured. It's not necessary to wet sand. However, I didn't realise this until after the model was complete. The wet sanding didn't detract from the finish of the model, so there was no issues. Once all the parts were painted and cured, I could then move on to clear coating. Anything not painted in the bodywork colour received a couple of coats of Tamiya X22 Clear. The bodywork, however, received zero paints Diamond 2K Clear. This was my first time using it and some trial and error took place. The recommended volumes in 10 parts clear, 5 parts hardener and 1.5 parts thinner. So for example, 10ml, 5ml and 1.5ml. However, when I used these recommended volumes, the finish gave me a horrible orange peel effect. Maybe I didn't give it enough of a wet coat, maybe I held the brush too far away from the model, I wasn't sure. So to rectify the problem, I gave the bodywork a wet sand of 2, 4 and 8K grit. When wet sanding, it's important to run across the paintwork and not push into it, if that makes sense. Carefully I sanded away until I was satisfied, then resprayed the clear. This time though, I increased the thinner from 1.5mm to 3mm, and this did the trick. While the bodywork was left to cure for a few days, I could begin constructing the engine. When it comes to painted parts, I like to use AK's CA magnet glue, and when I apply it I do so with a toothpick. It was finally nice to see the model come together, and as the parts were coated in clear, I also applied some Tamiya panel line accent colour black to enhance the detail and make it look like an engine had some oil. With the engine complete, this led nicely onto the decals, as there was a few on the engine that needed applying. Decals are my least favourite aspect of modelling. It always feels to me like this is the stage where all my hard work could come undone. When it does come to applying them though, I like to use micro set and micro sol. The decals that come in the kit were absolutely trashed and replacements were not readily available, but I managed to find a company in Singapore that supplies them. Application wise, I carefully cut the decal from the sheet and let it sit in warm water. Concurrently, I prepare the area for the decal with micro set. Once the decal is ready to come out of the water, I remove as much as possible on a paper towel, then carefully apply it until I'm happy where it's to sit and leave it for a few minutes. I then carefully brush on some more set, careful not to flood it. What I'm trying to do here is not let it dry out, and after a couple of rounds of this, I'll then gently use micro sol to soften it even more. Some of the decals can take their time, especially ones that need wrapping around bodywork, and the trick is just to be patient. The seat belts were bought from Spot Models in Spain, and despite my best efforts I struggled to film the construction. This was mainly due to my hand getting in the way. It was simple enough though, I just cut the ribbons to length and folded them through and back on themselves through the buckle. The final aspect of the model was to paint the wheels. As you can see, the decals were trashed and I couldn't source any Goodyear decals, so I bought a Stencil. Initially I struggled to decide how best to use it, but in the end I went for holding it firmly and being extremely careful. I heavily thinned down some XF3 and while using a 0.2 needle I carefully sprayed, conscious not to have any overspill on the tyre or create bleeding or build up of paint underneath the stencil. The bodywork was given another coat of clear to seal the decals in, and once cured the decals really did look like parts of the paint job, so I'll definitely be using zero paints again. All that was left to do was construct the model. Well everyone, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this build then please hit the like button, and if you haven't done so already consider subscribing, as it helps the channel grow and kick the algorithm into working. If you want to be super helpful, then sharing the video with friends or on social media will definitely support my channel as well. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next build.